You're listening to episode 71 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Michael W. Taft joins us to speak about The Mindful Geek, secular meditation for smart skeptics. Remember the movie Revenge of the Nerds? Or do you ever watch The Big Bang Theory? The heroes are the brainy folks who like comics, computers, science fiction, and science fact. They are also skeptics, wanting to learn about why we have the provisional understanding of the natural world that we do. They see beauty in fractals and hear the music of the cosmos. These are the people I most identify with, and why it's personally gratifying to be able to have an episode about mindfulness that would appeal to my tribe. Michael W. Taft is a meditation teacher, best-selling author, science fiction freak, and neuroscience junkie. As a mindfulness coach, he specializes in secular, science-based mindfulness training in groups, corporate settings, and one-on-one sessions. Michael is the author of several books, including The Mindful Geek and Non-Dualism, as well as the editor of such books as Hardwiring Happiness by Rick Hanson and the upcoming The Science of Enlightenment by Shinzen Yang. He has taught at Google and worked on curriculum development for Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. Michael is also an official advisor to the Therapeutic Neuroscience Lab. He was previously editor-in-chief of Being Human, a site for exploring what evolution, neuroscience, biology, psychology, archaeology, and technology can tell us about the human condition, and was editorial director of Sounds True. Our guest today is Michael W. Taft. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Ted. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad to be speaking with you because, as I mentioned in the introduction, this is finally an episode truly for my tribe. So thank you so much for being with me on this. Tell us about your background.
Well, Ted, I got going in meditation when I was a teenager because I was suffering from really acute anxiety. And this was back in the mid-70s in Michigan. And I was having crippling anxiety attacks. And there really wasn't any help available that I could find. And so just luckily, somehow I had heard about this thing called meditation and sort of had a very layperson's half-baked idea of what that might be. I'd read a little bit about it in some book or another, and so I just gave it a shot on my own in my room as a teenager. And even that little bit of very poorly executed meditation helped tremendously. And so I found a lot of relief from the anxiety and got hooked. And so after that, I was a lifelong meditator, and that's been about 35 years now. And that includes meditating quite a bit in a Hindu tradition and also in India and Japan, doing a lot of work in the Buddhist tradition, mainly with Shinzen Yang. I was the editorial director at Sounds True for quite some time, so I worked with many, many teachers, creating their programs and learning how they taught. And then in the last 10 years, I've been particularly interested in the scientific aspect of investigating mindfulness and meditation, and have sort of had the very lucky opportunity to work with a number of neuroscientists and a number of interesting thinkers on that topic.
So your book is, I think, particularly appealing to folks like me who are science nerds and skeptics as well. Was there a particularly strong reason or intentionality on addressing their interests?
Yes, one really important issue came up for me, which was that mindfulness and meditation is in a way so rational and so effective. And yet the venues in which it's taught and the ways in which it's taught tend to turn off practical, rational thinkers. Most of the traditional methods and the traditional venues just are almost like geared to turn away anyone who is scientific or skeptical or rational. And I thought that was kind of a shame, because it seems like there's a match made in heaven there between practicing meditation and people who like to think logically and systematically. And in fact, there's so much science now backing up some of the basic principles of meditation and mindfulness that it just seemed like, man, this really shouldn't be made so hard for people who would like it so much. And then on top of it, I happen to be working a lot teaching mindfulness in Silicon Valley at various tech companies, particularly Google. And I just noticed that with these rooms full of engineers and so on, what was landing and what wasn't, and how to really pique their interest and get them involved without some kind of bait and switch into a dramatic sudden, switch into like a full-on religious Buddhist kind of thing. So I felt like, in a way, to put it, briefly, that they were an underserved audience who might actually get a lot out of this. So that's why I wrote the book.
And you include a lot of things that are also appealing to the more science fiction nerdy side. I see quotes from Star Wars and lots of other things too. Was there a particular interest in sharing that sci-fi lover side of your own personality?
Well, I am a total science fiction geek, and even though there's Star Trek and Star Wars and all that in there, for me it goes even much more. I love very intense science fiction novels like Ian M. Banks and Alistair Reynolds and all that sort of stuff, very deep science fiction. And I thought, wow, here's an opportunity to, connect with people on that level also. And it seems to have worked very well. People like that aspect of the book.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of meditation books or those on contemplative practices that include references to Blade Runner. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. Yes.
So in the book, you build gradually, introducing practices amidst insights about them and information on the research. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit what you've heard from the readers on that approach.
Well, for the most part, the readers that I've heard from really appreciate that it's there. Most of them who have gone into it feel like it's sort of too much to even handle. There's quite a number of references and footnotes or endnotes. If you want to go into them, they're there. And so what I haven't heard from is too many people saying something like, hey, these references are not working for me. They're not really that complete. And that's because I have several, as I mentioned, people who I've worked with who are actual neuroscientists who went over the references with me and made sure the stuff was ironclad and that I wasn't making claims that I couldn't back up. And so if you, again, none of this is necessary, but if you wanted to really go into those endnotes in the book, it would be, in fact, a kind of complete or the beginning of a complete education in the science, the literal science of mindfulness.
So tell us about the meditation algorithm.
Yeah, so this is something that it's probably one of the more original things in the book. It's something that was inspired by Shinzen's approach, which is very algorithmic and iterative. And I felt like since I was talking to a lot of engineers and programmers and coders and so on, that this sort of systematic, algorithmic, iterative approach was really appropriate. And so what the meditation algorithm is a moment by moment system or sequence of things to do to make sure in that moment you're having a full meditation experience. And in the basic mindfulness system of Shinzen Young, that means you have concentration, you have sensory clarity, and you have, he would call it equanimity. I call it acceptance in the book. So concentration, clarity, and equanimity. And so what I'm encouraging the reader to do is with every cycle of labeling, or let's say once every breath, you're making sure you are concentrating, you're making sure you are labeling, you're making sure you have sensory clarity going, you're making sure you're accepting the sensation, and then you're kind of doing that all at once. And that's one iteration of the meditation algorithm. Then you come back, you contact the sensation again, you label it, you concentrate, you go into the details of the sensation, which is the sensory clarity aspect, you accept it, and then again, you sort of do it all at once. And then you just keep cycling through that. And I find that it's a very good way to ensure that beginners are doing all the parts of mindfulness or doing all the parts of meditation faithfully.
And something to note about that is that this practice and the algorithm, the way you've represented it, it's not about thinking about sensory experience. It's really about experiencing sensory experience.
Yeah, and that's a big stumbling block that I find over and over again is that people, for example, are picturing their body parts rather than feeling their body parts. So they're getting a mental image of a sensation in their foot. They're seeing their foot rather than actually feeling their foot. So this is like one of the things I find over and over. And so by directing them on purpose, saying, hey, those mental images are fine and they're normal, but that's not what we're doing here. Redirect your attention towards the actual physical sensation. I find that that will, boom, instantly deepen someone's meditation.
One of the folks that we have in common, Dr. Judd Brewer at the Center for Mindfulness, mentions in I think it's one of his own studies, and this is using EEG machines, so folks are wired in, that there was a particular person who was thinking about breathing, and the patterns on screen showed a particular way of his brain operating. And as soon as he realized, oh, I need to just experience breathing, shifted completely how his brain was operating. And so it's interesting to see how it seems like a subtle idea. Oh, no, don't think about this. Really just experience it. Actually has corollaries and demonstrable ones to what's happening in your brain.
Yeah, I remember hearing that from Judd, and it's one of the reasons that I give that direction so clearly. This difference between, thinking about the sensation as some kind of visualization and feeling it directly in your body is enormous. And Shinzen is another person who, describes this very well and often gives that direction. So it's also interesting to notice that when you then meditate on purpose on your thinking process, you shift it away from your body and into on purpose noticing these mental images or on purpose noticing the mental talk. And you can get into just as deep or even deeper of an absorption state with that. So it's not that it has to be only in the body. It can be in the thinking process too. It just depends on what you're trying to focus on.
You seem to blend a love of the esoteric with the growing scientific study of mindfulness. What's it like for you navigating those waters?
Yeah, it's interesting because I am a mystical weirdo on some level. Completely have swum in those waters and like to worship deities and, the full spectrum of religious expression. And at the same time, have a very strong and deep love of science and hardcore rational science. And I feel like there are two missteps, at least they're missteps for me, that I can make and that I notice when other people make them. One is to say that it has to be one or the other. I don't think that's true. But the other is to try to make them work together in some kind of grand overview system where perfectly rational science and wild and woolly mysticism are somehow wedded into a kludgy pseudoscience, half poetry sort of thing. That doesn't work for me.
I think that's where the pseudoscience comes from, is that unholy alliance between.
Yeah, boy, is that unpleasant. It really gives you kind of psychic indigestion, you know,
Not in the psychic sense, but
mental indigestion, let's say. So for me, instead of A or B or A plus B together in one thing, it's like you do mysticism when you're doing mysticism and you do science when you're doing science. They're two different reality tunnels. There are two different ways of thinking and working, and they're sort of like overlays that you use depending on what your goal is. If I'm going to design a new aircraft or something, I would use the scientific overlay, or at least I would hope that aeronautical engineers are using the scientific overlay. However, if I'm going to, bust out some Shiva worship, that's the wrong overlay. I want to go into mysticism mode, right? And I think it's, without trying to sound like I'm blowing my own horn here, but I mean, this is the hallmark of a mildly mature spirituality, is that you can shift in and out of these reality tunnels or these ways of thinking as appropriate, and you don't need them to somehow cohere into a grand whole.
right. And the claims that one makes about the natural world, those fall into more so the realm of science and our best understanding that is, of course, provisional, because we can be wrong and we learn new stuff all the time, but that we also are human beings. We have feelings, emotions, and this wonderful, chaotic, and very complex aspect of just being human. There can be a way of engaging with the senses that appeals and is deeply moving. And it doesn't mean that we believe in magic. It does mean that we're engaging with being fully human in ways that work for us, and they may not work for other people. That's okay.
That's okay. And yet, on a first person subjective level, it can be tremendously satisfying, tremendously meaningful. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a deep truth about the third person exterior objective world.
I'm wondering if you have found contemporary mindfulness to be a watering down of a tradition. What do you think about that particular criticism of contemporary secular mindfulness?
Well, it's interesting. I think that that's one of those questions with a lot of different branches. But I do think that a lot of the mindfulness I see out there in the world is tremendously watered down. It's sort of like, here's a 3-second technique to sort of do this or that. Now you're going to relax. Now you're going to be present. And it seems like it's very millimeter thin. There's no depth there. There's no fuller, richer, deeper understanding of the possibilities. And at that point, it's almost like, why bother? On the other hand, I don't think that the removal of the religious aspect is necessarily a watering down. For the most part, the complaint or the critique of removing the religious element refers to, removing the moral aspect, the behavior code. And while I think that behavior code is important, I don't think that it is that unique. I think that number one, it boils down to, do unto others, or sort of basically saying, don't be a dick. And what I want to say is that when you meditate, and if you're really actually meditating and doing the non-millimeter thick version of this, but getting into the meat of it, you're going to be getting more and more sensitive to how your actions affect other people. So the kind of example problem, in philosophy, one of the big example problems is the trolley question, whether you
Push the person in the way of the
yeah,
trolley,
exactly.
save some others.
All of that, exactly. And in terms of mindfulness, the example question is always the sniper problem. Like would a corporate mindfulness teacher teach a sniper to be a better sniper using mindfulness? And so he's just getting better at blowing people's heads off. And isn't this a tragedy? And I think that is an interesting question, but I think the answer is if that sniper is really practicing meditation for real, they're going to quickly become too sensitive to even do that job. So I think I trust the meditation itself. I trust the practice to guide someone into these basic moral principles that the traditional religion provides.
So, what do you see as the biggest challenge or challenges to contemporary mindfulness today?
I think that smartphones are the biggest challenge.
Say more about that.
I love my smartphone. I'm attached to the thing. And yet when you think about how it functions, it's almost an anti-mindfulness device. It's like training you over and over into distraction, or as the phrase goes, continuous partial attention. And I notice that it's doing it relentlessly. And so I think that we need to tame our devices and learn to turn off the notifications and learn to use it when we need it and to turn it off when we don't. And to get very, very intentional about it, because otherwise it's kind of fracturing your concentration over and over. And when something is doing that over and over, it's training you to have fractured attention. And so to me, that's actually a huge issue.
Can you tell us a little bit about the science of enlightenment with Shinzen Young?
Boy, that was a great project. I just love Shinzen. I met him at Sounds True when I was editorial director there. And in fact, I actually remember the moment when I opened this cardboard box full of cassette tapes and I listened to one of his programs, which probably wasn't old back then, but it was called Thanatos and Eros. And he was describing this whole aspect of meditation as, facing death. And I was just spellbound. And I thought, we got to get this guy in here. Oh my God. And so we brought him in and recorded some programs, and those were successful. And we decided to bring him back and do a big program. So Tammy Simon, the owner of Sounds True, produced that program with Shinzen, where Shinzen just did a brain dump for a week with some people in the studio. And then they handed me something like 50 hours. I forget how long it was, but on the order of 50 hours of raw material. And so I just sat in an editing booth for weeks, turning that raw material into 12 sides of this program that made sense and held together. And after that, I was just sold. I'm like, I got to go to this guy's retreats. And so that became this classic program, the Science of Enlightenment, this audio program, which is still a big seller, which still gets Shinzen a tremendous number of students. It's just brilliant what he did there. But about a decade ago, we decided that we should make a book out of it. And so Sounds True contracted me to make the book, and me and Shinzen started working on it. And we thought, man, all we got to do is like get a transcript of this audio and then kind of dress it up a little bit and we're done. Well, and then a decade passed and, we tried this and we tried that and we did this and we did that. And it seemed like no matter what I did or Shinzen did or Tammy did, we just couldn't make this manuscript work. And then about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, everything just lined up where I felt like, oh, we can bring this together now. And we went for another last push, and sure enough, it all fell in line, and I was able to complete a version of the manuscript that everyone was very happy with. And so that is now in the production pipeline and should be out, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's coming out this September 2016. So I could not be happier. That was a long time coming, that particular book.
Our guest today has been Michael Taft. You can find out more about his work at themindfulgeek.com. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Ted. That was a blast.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.